Design thinking and writing a book? On this episode, you'll hear how Hannah was able to make the connection that really what she didn't do in her book was write it, but more, she designed it.
Been trying to actively go out and try tea and stuff. And so I'm excited to do that in New York too. I just got done making my map of all the tea places in Manhattan and Brooklyn too. So I'm really excited to just try to hit as many of those as I can on the weekends. So.
What could be nicer than enjoying a traditional English afternoon tea?
I teach an entrepreneurship class, and in this class, I happen to help people create things like a book or a podcast season. But for Hannah, when she walked into the class, she saw this as an opportunity to create a book, which she did. And a great one at that helped her share her love of tea with others. But what happened next is where part of the magic really happened. The next semester, she was fortunate enough to take a design thinking class. And as I asked her about that experience doing design thinking, it suddenly unlocked for her that in fact, she hadn't really written a book, but she'd been designing a book all along the way. And that's really one of the powers of Creation Event, is if you think differently, instead of thinking about writing something or thinking about producing sort of the podcast, instead you think about designing something that you want to create. Well, it turns out the experience is more fun, it's more effective, and turns out it is a way better way to design your creation event. So next time you decide that, hey, you want to write a book, think differently. Maybe you might want to launch a book, or maybe you might want to design a book or do something else different. As Hannah found out, the truth is that you want to find a way to do something different that allows you to learn and share what you're learning along the way.
So that's one of the biggest things that I like to talk about with people when they ask me about the book. Everyone always asks how you did it. And so that kind of leads to a little bit of fessing up and explaining the class. But I really like to talk about it because just the whole process of going through it I think is really cool, and like you said, it can be applied to anything. And I actually took, while I was abroad, an entrepreneurship class and a design thinking class.
Design thinking. One of the points you argue is that it doesn't just make you a better designer, it makes you better at anything. Tell us about that.
I've always thought one of the wonderful things about being a designer is not just that I get to work on lots of exciting projects, but it helps me in my life, right? So when it's something as simple as I'm going to throw a dinner party for some friends, so I start, instead of just turning up at 7 o'clock and thinking about what I'm going to make, I actually design that. I try and design that experience. I think, well, who am I going to bring together, and what's the space going to be like, and how does the food and the space work together? All of these things that I naturally think about as a designer. And I think that's what design thinking does for you. It's a set of tools that allows you to approach life, particularly the parts of life where it might be advantageous to solve a problem differently.
And those were taught in more of the traditional way of you start a business, you have a team.
You're saying we didn't do a traditional sense of entrepreneurship?
No, we didn't. And so it was cool because, when I got to do those classes after learning it this way, I could kind of see your point of how it doesn't, inspire a ton of change, or a changed path or changed purpose in people. But that being said, though, I'm still glad I took those classes after writing the book, because I kind of made the connection more. And if I wanted to start my own startup, I really know how to there's methods to it that you can use that can really improve the outcome.
When you see it now, now seeing what it is, because when you're doing it, you're sort of I'm writing a book, but when you abstract and you see the design thinking, did you see how
exactly literally in class, in this class in Copenhagen, the slide deck was you could have put yours over it and changed the words, and it's the same thing that the professor was teaching. And it was also really helpful for me during the project when I was working with my team and we were making our startup, because when we were doing some of the things customer discovery and interviewing people and trying to figure out what the need was, what the pain points were and stuff, I basically pulled something that we did from your class. So our idea was kind of car sharing, I guess, and we called it Campus Car, and it was kind of a zip car, but instead of you owning the car fleet, students would lease their cars out to other students, kind of thing, and stuff like that kind of exists, not for students, but when we were kind of exploring and interviewing people, my group was kind of just sitting there being okay, what do we think we know? and we kind of got off on this tangent, like, could we use like used cars in some way? Because we found something. I was just like, guys, let's just call like used car dealerships like right now. They're like, what? I was like, no, like, let's do it. Let's just call them and ask. And they were like so confused. And I finally like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna pick up my phone and call them. And I called like 5 or 10, and like 3 of them responded, and like we got information from them that way. And we didn't end up like pursuing that path, but we got enough info to know that like we shouldn't go here, kind of thing. So it reminded me of the process of like doing iterations and pivoting a little bit. And also like we just found out so much faster, and it totally changed the scope of our whole project.
Like a real
And
entrepreneur.
like,
Look at
yeah, in like a super like in like 20 minutes we figured that out versus like going through the whole semester.
you.